The revitalisation of the township economy takes priority in the Gauteng 2023 budget. The province has allocated the bulk of the budget to help boost economic ecosystems in townships. The Finance MEC Jacob Mamabolo says townships in the province are not performing to their fullest potential. Mamabolo delivered the Gauteng budget at the provincial legislature in Johannesburg earlier.
Over 3 billion rand has been allocated to Gauteng townships. The province says investing in these economies will boost overall economic growth as well as job creation. Gauteng contributes 35% towards the country's gross domestic product, and it wants to increase its contribution to the growth of the South African economy.
We are injecting into the Gauteng economy a total of 493.4 billion over the medium-term expenditure framework, of which a bigger share of it will go into supporting township economy, creating jobs, especially for the youth, empowerment of women, and addressing the energy crisis, and of course supporting social services.
E-tolls have been a thorn for Gauteng residents. Although the province have decided to scrap them permanently, some work still needs to be done for the process to be finalized.
We did indicate that there is still work to be done to fully implement and give practical effect to the announcement made by the Honourable Minister. It is therefore in this context that we reported that a memorandum of agreement will be concluded with national government. As Premier Lesufi announced, the negotiations with the national government are still underway. Once these engagements have been finalized, the MOU will be concluded and proper feedback and update will be given.
As the economic hub of the country that can no longer afford to bear the brunt of the power crisis, Gauteng is now working to lessen the burden of the rolling blackouts. Mamabolo has allocated 1.2 billion rand towards the production of about 800 megawatts of renewable energy. Notando Makutulela, SABC News, Johannesburg.
Well, to speak a little bit more about this particular aspect of the budget, we are joined in studio by Jacob Mamabolo, the Gauteng MEC for Finance. Very good evening to you, MEC. Thank you so much for speaking to us. So we heard all the figures there, so I won't take you back there, but I want to look at where we're from. In 2018, we had the Gauteng Premier talk about an investment of between 600 million rand and 17 billion rand between 2014 and 2017. But most importantly, it's been said that the money that has been invested in townships, there has been a certain amount of leakage that has failed to change the underlying economic conditions of the township economy as you conceptually are saying it is and what you're trying to improve. Can you comment on that?
So firstly, let me thank you as I greet you and all the viewers and sincere thanks for inviting us. I think just as a brief background and context, and I'll quickly get into the issues. The reality of the matter is that the townships do have a very huge potential to boost the growth of the Gauteng economy. We're contributing about 35% to GDP. But we believe there's a very big potential that we're not tapping into, and that's because historically, and it's not what people call market failure, there's been a very deliberate policy to just ignore creating investments and productive assets in townships. People there are perceived as a risky asset when they apply for loans. Banks don't even look at them. So small, medium, micro enterprises, when they try to get support, it's not happening. So that is why the Gauteng provincial government, and of course tracing it back to the period you're mentioning, and we're the only province that has thus far worked so hard to pass an act of the provincial legislature, the Township Economy Development Act, which is a deliberate attempt intervention to try to make sure that not only the provincial government, but also municipalities provide support to the township economy in a much more open, transparent, structured way. So the second issue that I'd like to raise is when we announced that we want to form a bank in the province, we also indicated that it is precisely because there's a potential in the economy. Our people find it very much difficult to pass the risk engine criteria that is being used to evaluate the application for loans, for credit. So it is in that context that, and upfront today, in the very first 2 paragraphs that of the budget, that we're saying we want to spend a big portion of this budget in supporting township entrepreneurs. Just next week, we will be in Soweto having a breakfast session with some of the key players in the township economic space.
MEC, with due respect, let me jump in and say, I think the criticism has been in terms of the financial leakage on the policy framework, saying that conceptually township economies should not be treated like the informal sector. So you are saying, you mentioned some of the problems which from an investment point of view that would capacitate some of these businesses. But for instance, if you look at the challenges that government itself could deal with, for instance, the restricted linkages with the formal value chain. So if they're competing, there's unfair competition with urban areas. There's the issue of land and services, of which a lot of these businesses also struggle with. What are you doing? Are you investing in that? Is part of the money that you're speaking about going to improve some of those things?
So 2 things are important there. So the measures that you are talking about are clearly stated in the Township Economy Development Act in what we call creating township economic zones in order to make sure that we support township entrepreneurs. The second part is in the speech today, we are saying the concept of a township revitalization is essentially about how much do we spend from our procurement to support and make sure that income or revenue flows into the townships. And that is a function of supply chain and procurement. So in the township revitalization, we're also looking at how much of our goods and services and infrastructure is able to flow into and support entrepreneurs through our procurement systems. So the issues of township entrepreneurs coming together, combining their efforts in order to optimize their capacity of economies of scale, pricing, and all that. We have said that in our supply chain, we should be able to deliberately support and boost township entrepreneurs. Today we said some of the targets that we have set for expenditure to go into the townships have been missed because our very supply chain capacity is not repositioned and geared to make sure that money flows into supporting buying from and of course, making sure that we're able to procure directly some of these things from the township. So that's exactly what the Act is looking for. The Act also does talk to the fact that people in the township, some of them want warehousing at the taxi ranks to be able to put their things. Informal traders, they have to carry their things every day, back and forth. So that's why we have also identified taxi ranks as key nodes. So we also have to look at what are some of the things that we can support. Transport, if you look at issues of deliveries. So there are subsectors in the township, stock fails. So the nature of the township economy, whilst yes, it is distinct and different, but some of the support that they need, infrastructure, bulk infrastructure, office space, facilities, those are some of the things that with our approach of the Township Economic Development Act, we want to make deliberate interventions in that. Have we succeeded thus far? I can tell you that there's a lot of money that is going into the townships, but it is not long that the Act has been introduced. And the reason why the Act was introduced was because we have seen that there were some weaknesses that we needed to sort out at a policy level.
Identify then the weaknesses in the urban renewal program, the neighborhood development partnership program, because you identify issues that have been there for a long time. The issue of scalability, the fact that they are survivalist in nature, particularly when it comes to huge infrastructure challenges. You talk about transportation, and you say there ought to be some sort of either feeder system or cooperation between the informal sector and the township entrepreneurs and even amongst themselves. But what changes need to be made to make a huge difference? Because we're saying here that the conditions under which they're operating at the moment are not primed for them to grow.
Yes. So that is why we are saying that we should reposition our fiscal instrument, because the best way to support township economy is when we as government, the provincial government and municipalities, deliberately make sure that we buy directly from the townships and support the goods and the services that they provide. So to that extent, that's why we're saying, we have created a central database registration for SMMEs in the townships. We have created capacity for mobile, capacity to go in and help them. We are doing training to make sure that they can leverage our processes. Some of them are too complicated, inaccessible to them. So all these issues that I'm talking to are a deliberate policy by the provincial government to make sure that we go where the private sector couldn't go, because it is only a democratic state that can deliberately work with the people in the townships, including bringing in the private sector itself, that we can be able to solve this problem.
So how much of your crime budget, for instance, is going towards dealing with the conditions under which these traders would then have to operate? And if you're going to enjoy some sort of business boom, the hours can't be just restricted to when it's safe to operate. There's also the issue of the purchasing power with high unemployment levels, and we've seen the dwindling quality of life. What are you doing to then, ingest or invigorate the township economy in that sense?
Well, I think one of the most important things that we have announced as the provincial government with regard to crime fighting to support particularly the townships is, you'll see our budget for community safety used to be at about 1 billion. We are saying over the medium term expenditure framework, we're moving it to about 4 billion. And we are saying those resources should be spent mainly in the townships, because we know that crime is actually creating much more bigger problems in the province, in the township. So the overall strategic approach that we're taking to boosting our crime-fighting capacity is also directed to the townships. But I think the issue that I would like to really emphasize is the best way to make the Township Economy Development Act successful depend on, one, conversations with the people and entrepreneurs in the townships. The province, whilst it has got supply chain opportunities in its supply chain, in its fiscal instruments, but better conversations, reaching out to people in the townships, also empowering them with information about how this system works. Because, and secondly, for it to succeed, it's going to be through interventions made by government, through its supply chain, and of course its
very quick one.
Resources.
Goods and services. There is at least the idea that only certain products are for the township and cannot be exported to other areas. And this is what's also preventing growth. How would you then stimulate growth in that aspect?
So once again, and it's not only that, it's also where departments will say we can't find certain suppliers of certain services in the townships, and then they try to justify still going to the traditional markets. So that is why we're saying the best way, because remember, we must still comply with supply chain policies. And as you'll know, there were challenges with set-asides for businesses of historically disadvantaged people. But be that as it may, we still need to make sure that each department set up a target of, in its goods and services spent, how much of that will buy not from the traditional big monopolies, but will go buy from the people in the townships. And the law says where the market, people may not have certain products, or where people may not be able to play that role, we have a responsibility to support and develop them. So we've got to appreciate that, you know, the departments themselves and municipalities must set up and outline very clear programs and targets of how will they reach out to businesses owned by women, by people with disability, by youth, and all that. And that is why we say today, our supply chain function from today is going to be monitoring those targets, whether they are being achieved, whether money is going into the townships. Unless we do that, we will remain with those leakages and weaknesses that we are referring to. So we haven't really gone far, but at least we have departed.
All right, thank you so much for your time, and appreciated your insights on the Gauteng provincial budget that was announced earlier on by the MEC Jacob Mamabolo.